Shadows stretched across broken towers, and the sky above was painted black with smoke. The war had lasted too long, and the defenders were finished. What had once been a proud alien world was now a graveyard. Streets that once held laughter, and life now held nothing but silence and ash dots. The enemy had done their work well. Their war machines, tall and cruel, stood like statues over the ruins. Their red eyes burned in the distance, watching, waiting. No voice rose against them now. No army stood in their way. The resistance was gone, crushed under endless waves of fire and steel. Those who survived hid in basements and caves, trembling. At every sound they no longer prayed for victory. They no longer dreamed of freedom. They only prayed for a quick end, because hope had already died. Among the survivors, there was a saying whispered in fear: "No one is coming." The galaxy had watched this war, and none had dared to help. No allies, no saviors, no heroes. The world had been left to burn. The silence was heavy, almost unbearable. It was the kind of silence that came after screams had ended, after battles had been lost, after a world had finally given up. The enemy enjoyed that silence. It was their victory song. But then, something changed. At first it was only a sound, a low, distant rumble that made the ground tremble. Survivors froze, lifting their heads. The enemy machines turned their gaze upward. The sound grew louder, rolling across the sky like thunder. It was not natural. It was not the sound of falling debris, or storms, or bombs. This was different. The clouds above began to glow with light. Smoke parted as a shadow pushed through the sky. The enemy laughed at first, thinking it was another desperate resistance trick, another broken weapon, but the shadow grew larger. Then another appeared, and another. Strange ships pierced through the smoke, cutting the sky open. Their hulls gleamed with fire as they burned through the atmosphere, but they did not slow. They fell like meteors, fast and unstoppable. The defenders watched with wide eyes, their hearts beating again for the first time in years. They whispered to each other, their voices shaking. Who are they? What are those ships? No one should be left. The enemy shifted uneasily. Their machines raised their weapons, preparing to strike the newcomers. Yet, something in the way those ships moved was different. They were not desperate, not clumsy. They moved with sharp purpose, as if every second of their descent had already been calculated. The rumble turned into a roar. The very air seemed to vibrate as the ships descended lower, faster. Windows shattered, dust filled the air, the ground shook. And then, with a deafening crash, the first vessel struck the earth. The enemy braced for an explosion, but there was none. Instead, the ship's doors began to open. The silence returned, heavier than before. Even the enemy stopped moving. Everyone was watching. A hiss of steam escaped as the ramp lowered. Shadows moved inside, dark against the light. Heavy footsteps echoed as figures began to appear, stepping into the ruined world. They were tall, covered in armor. Their weapons gleamed with a deadly shine. They did not rush, they did not stumble. They walked with the calm, steady pace of soldiers who feared nothing. No one recognized them. Their armor was different. Their faces were hidden, but there was something about their presence that was undeniable. Something in the way they carried themselves. The defenders whispered again, this time with awe. They are not like us. They are not like the enemy. Who are they? The enemy commanders shouted orders, trying to break the tension. Weapons powered up, red lights flashing across the battlefield. But still the armored figures advanced, unshaken. Their leader raised a hand, signaling to the others. In perfect silence, they formed ranks. The first enemy machine moved forward, its massive body towering over the soldiers. Its cannons glowed, hot, ready to strike. It aimed down at the newcomers, certain of its victory. And yet, the soldiers did not flinch. One of them raised a weapon, sleek, compact, but humming with power. The defenders held their breath. Even the enemy hesitated. The silence stretched long, unbearable, until finally a single shot echoed. The blast tore through the machine, ripping its chest apart. Fire erupted as the giant collapsed, crashing into the ruins with a scream of tearing metal. The ground shook with its fall. The defenders gasped. The enemy staggered back, and for the first time in countless battles, fear touched their ranks. The armored figures did not cheer. They did not speak. They only advanced, one step at a time, through smoke and fire. The survivors, still hiding in their ruins, whispered a single word. It passed from one mouth to another, trembling with disbelief, then with growing hope. Humans. And in that moment everyone understood. The silence of the end had just been broken. Smoke hung heavy in the air, curling through the shattered ruins, yet no one moved. Both sides, defenders hiding in the shadows, and the enemy standing proud with their war machines. watched the strangers who had stepped from the strange vessels. The silence after that first kill was louder than any explosion that the defenders had seen the enemy destroying whole armies in minutes, and now, with a single shot, these armored newcomers had dropped one of the enemy's machines as if it were nothing. It was impossible, unbelievable. For years, no one had been able to stop the enemy, and yet here they stood, silent, calm, as though this was not a battle at all, but routine. The enemy commanders barked orders, their voices sharp and filled with anger. More machines advanced, their weapons glowing hot, charging for fire. Their heavy steps made the earth quake as they surrounded the humans. Sparks lit the air, and the sound of metal grinding filled the ruins. This was not hesitation anymore. The enemy was preparing to crush them, but the humans did not rush. They did not panic. Their movements were controlled, like a blade cutting through water. One raised a hand, giving a signal that none of the defenders understood. In perfect unison, the human soldiers spread out, their armor shifting with mechanical ease. Their weapons hummed with strange energy, power building silently. The first machine fired. A bright beam of molten energy tore through the smoke, striking where the humans had stood. The ground erupted into fire, concrete exploding into dust. The defenders cried out, covering their heads, certain that the new arrivals had been destroyed in a single blast. But when the smoke cleared, the soldiers were still there. Their armor glowed faintly, scorched by heat, but unbroken. Not one had fallen. The enemy hesitated again. They had crushed fleets, destroyed worlds, burned through shields and armor thicker than a wall of stone. But this was different. A second machine fired, its cannons spitting rapid bursts of fire. The humans moved now, not fast, not wild, but smooth and precise. They shifted in perfect rhythm, their formation bending like water around rocks. Their weapons lit the battlefield, blue streaks of power slashing through the air. Another enemy machine collapsed, its chest torn open. Then another, and another. The defenders could not believe what they were seeing. Soldiers who did not break, weapons that tore down the unstoppable, movements that spoke not of fear, but of certainty. For so long the galaxy had watched the enemy win every battle. For so long the defenders had only tasted defeat. But now, in a single moment, the balance of power had begun to crack. One of the younger defenders whispered from the shadows, his voice trembling as if afraid to speak the truth. They fight, like they already know they cannot lose. And, in a way, it was true. The humans moved as if they had already measured the battlefield, already seen the end of the fight before the first shot was fired. Every blast, every strike, was not wasted. Not a single bullet went astray. Their weapons screamed with precision, and their armor shrugged off blows that would have torn apart tanks. Fear began to spread not among the defenders, but among the enemy. Their commanders shouted louder, trying to control the panic. More machines pushed forward, and infantry poured from behind their lines. The ground shook under the weight of their advance. The night sky lit with fire as more weapons charged. The humans did not retreat. Instead, they stepped forward. Their leader raised a weapon longer than the rest, its barrel glowing bright, and unleashed a strike so powerful it lit up the entire city. An enemy squad was vaporized in an instant, their screams lost in the thunder of the blast. The defenders gasped. The enemy recoiled. The battlefield had shifted. And then another sound broke through the chaos. The defenders tilted their heads, confused. It was a rhythm, a beat, echoing across the ruins. For a moment they thought it was drums, but no, it was boots. Heavy, steady boots. The humans were advancing, not running, not rushing. They marched forward, each step measured, each strike deliberate. The enemy's courage cracked. Whispers of fear spread through their ranks. This was not supposed to happen. This world was supposed to be theirs already. The resistance was supposed to be finished. No one was left who could fight them. No one was left who could even try. And yet, these humans had appeared out of nowhere, moving with the confidence of predators stepping into a hunt. A defender hiding in the ruins pressed his hands against his head, unable to believe. "What are they?" he whispered. "What kind of creatures are they?" No answer came, but deep inside he knew. They were not like any other species the galaxy had known. They were something else entirely. The battle raged on. Fire and smoke swallowed the streets. Machines collapsed under the weight of relentless human firepower, and through it all the soldiers did not slow. They advanced step by step, carving through enemy lines as if the war had only just begun, as if the years of suffering were nothing but a prelude to this moment. And above, the sky still burned. More ships cut through the clouds, each one dropping. More armored figures into the war. The ground shook as hundreds of boots struck the earth. The enemy realized the truth far too late. This was not a desperate rescue. This was an arrival. And with that arrival, everything the enemy thought they controlled began to unravel. The galaxy, for the first time in years, was no longer silent. It was watching, and it would never forget the moment the humans came. The ground shook as the second wave of ships broke through the smoke-filled sky. Their descent was not rushed, not wild, but heavy with certainty. Fire trailed behind them, painting the heavens with streaks of light. Each vessel landed with thunder that echoed through the ruined city. Dust rose in clouds, covering the battlefield, but nothing could hide the sound that followed the rhythm of armored boots striking the earth. For years the defenders had lived in silence, forced into shadows by the enemy. Now that silence was broken, not by screams or by weapons, but by a march steady, united, unshaken. The sound grew louder with every step, and with it came a strange feeling spreading among the survivors, something they had not felt in so long that it felt foreign. Hope. The enemy tried to push back quickly, flooding the battlefield with their soldiers, their war machines locked into formation, weapons glowing red. They believed that sheer numbers would crush these strange intruders the way they had crushed all others. But deep inside, their commanders hesitated. Something about the humans unsettled them. These were not weak, desperate survivors. They walked as if they belonged here, as if the battlefield itself had been waiting for them. Through the haze, the humans advanced. Their armor gleamed under the firelight, their helmets hiding their faces. No voice was raised, no cry of fear, no roar of anger. They did not need it. Their silence spoke louder than any battle cry. The defenders hiding among the ruins pressed closer to each other, staring in awe. The humans moved like shadows given flesh. Each step they took was measured. Each gesture was precise. They did not scatter when attacked. They did not break when surrounded. Instead, they flowed as one, an unbroken line of soldiers cutting forward. First clash came suddenly. A towering enemy war machine charged, its cannons glowing, preparing to fire. Before it could release its strike, 3 humans stepped forward. Their weapons lit the air with blue fire, a storm of power slicing through the machine's armor. The massive creature staggered, its core exploding, its fall shaking the street. Sparks lit the ruins as its body collapsed into fire. The enemy's infantry rushed in, screaming their war cries. The humans did not flinch. They raised their weapons, forming a wall of fire so sharp and exact that it tore through the enemy like paper. Every shot found its mark. Every strike broke through armor. The enemy's numbers shrank in seconds, and with each fall, the battlefield grew quieter, not from victory, but from fear. A defender whispered, his voice trembling, "They are cutting through them like it means nothing." The human leader stood tall at the front, his weapon larger than the rest, glowing with strange light. He raised his hand, signaling the next move, and his soldiers obeyed without hesitation. They moved like one mind, bending around the enemy lines, striking from angles that no one expected. The defenders had seen countless battles, but never like this. These were not soldiers fighting for survival. These were predators, hunting with precision. The enemy commanders shouted, desperate now. They ordered their machines forward, ordered their soldiers to hold the line. But the panic was spreading faster than their commands. Every blast from the humans broke their discipline. Every step of those armored boots pushed the enemy backward. The battlefield that had once belonged to them was slipping away. In the shadows, an old defender lifted his head for the first time in years. His eyes filled with tears as he watched. This is what victory looks like," he whispered, the words almost forgotten to his tongue. The humans pressed forward, relentless. Smoke and fire wrapped around them, but still they advanced, never slowing, never stumbling. A blast from one of the enemy's cannons struck their formation, but the soldiers adjusted instantly, closing ranks without a word. Where one might have fallen, 3 stepped forward. The line did not break. The enemy roared in frustration, sending their heaviest war machine into the fray. It towered above the battlefield, its weapons glowing with power enough to destroy a city block. The defenders cried out in despair, thinking nothing could stop such a monster. But the humans did not retreat. Their leader lifted his weapon, its glow growing brighter, almost blinding. He waited, calm, until the machine charged. It shot, and then, with one blast, the leader fired. The sound tore through the air like thunder. The beam of light struck the machine's chest, cutting through steel and fire alike. For a moment, it froze, its glowing eyes dimming. Then it collapsed, crashing into the ruins, its destruction shaking the ground like an earthquake. The defenders stared in silence. The enemy staggered back. The humans kept moving, And then, the moment everyone had been waiting for came. The leader spoke. His voice carried through the chaos, clear, steady, deep. Though none of the defenders understood the words, the meaning was clear in his tone. It was not a voice of desperation, not a call for help. It was a promise that this was only the beginning. The defenders felt their hearts ignite again. For the first time in years, they stood taller. For the first time they believed. The enemy's fear was complete now. They had not faced soldiers like these before. They had not faced a species that fought not to survive, but to dominate. They realized, too late, that these humans were not saviors. They were something far more dangerous. And as more ships burned through the clouds above, dropping more soldiers into the heart of the war, the truth became clear. Humanity had entered the fight, and nothing, not the enemy, not the war, not even the galaxy itself, would ever be the same. The city burned as the battle raged on, but the flames no longer belonged to the enemy. For the first time in years, their machines were falling. Their soldiers stumbled back in confusion, their war cries drowned out by the thunder of human weapons. The ground was littered with wreckage, glowing red as fire spread across the ruins. The defenders could hardly breathe. They had hidden for so long, powerless, waiting only for death. Yet now, in front of their eyes, the unstoppable enemy was being pushed back. The humans fought with a precision that seemed unreal, each strike planned, each movement exact. They were not fighting a desperate war, they were rewriting it. The enemy tried to adapt. More troops poured into the streets, their claws and rifles flashing in the smoke. War machines stomped forward, their cannons glowing. The commanders barked furious orders, desperate to regain control, but fear had already poisoned their ranks. Every time a human squad advanced, the enemy lines bent and broke like glass under pressure. The clash was brutal. Blasts of fire and plasma filled the air, tearing buildings apart. Dust rained down, covering the ground in gray. But through the chaos, the humans marched forward, relentless. Their armor shone through the smoke, glowing faintly as if the battle itself fed their strength. Their weapons cut through steel as if it were paper. They moved like hunters, and the enemy could no longer deny it. They were prey, a small group of defenders, hiding in the ruins of an old temple, pressed against the broken walls and watched in awe. One of them, a young fighter with trembling hands, whispered, "They fight like death itself follows them." Another, older and scarred from years of war, shook his head slowly. "No," he murmured, "they fight like they are death." The enemy roared in fury, sending their largest war beast forward. It was a massive machine, towering above the ruins, armed with cannons and blades that had once shredded entire armies. Its red eyes glared down as it charged, each step shaking the earth. The defenders cried out in terror, but the humans did not retreat. Their leader raised his weapon, signaling his troops. Without hesitation, 3 squads split, surrounding the beast from different sides. Their movements were too fast, too precise for the enemy to track. Blasts of blue energy slammed into the machine's legs, tearing metal apart. Sparks rained down as one limb collapsed, then another. The beast screamed as it fell to the ground, its massive body shaking the battlefield. The humans climbed onto its frame, planting charges along its armor. Seconds later, fire erupted, tearing the beast apart in a storm of light. The wreckage burned, lighting the night sky brighter than any star. The defenders gasped. The enemy froze. The humans simply kept moving. For every machine destroyed, another seemed to rise. But it no longer mattered. The tide had shifted. The humans were not only winning, they were terrifying. The enemy soldiers began to hesitate before firing. Their machines faltered when advancing. Fear spread through their veins faster than any weapon could wound them. One defender dared to stand, clutching his broken rifle. His voice cracked as he shouted into the night, "Fight with them, fight with the humans." Others began to rise, embers of courage igniting in their hearts. They had lived too long in silence, too long in despair. Now seeing the enemy fall, they remembered what it felt like to stand. They picked up broken weapons, scraps of metal, anything they could wield, and joined the humans in the fight. It was chaos, smoke, fire, screams, and yet within that storm of destruction, a new sound grew, a chorus of hope. The defenders shouted, their voices raw but alive. The humans did not turn or speak, but they did not need to. Their presence was enough. The enemy commanders panicked. They shouted louder, driving their soldiers forward with threats and rage, but no amount of orders could stop the collapse. Their lines were breaking, their machines were burning. Their victory, once certain, was slipping through their claws. The Defenders fought beside the humans, their courage growing with each enemy that fell. For the first time, they were not fighting to survive, they were fighting to win. And deep inside, they knew it was because of the humans. Something about them was different. They did not fight with desperation. They fought with certainty, as if they had always known this day would come. Above, the sky tore open again. More human ships descended, their lights cutting through the darkness. The enemy turned their eyes upward and saw not rescue ships, not fragile transports, but vessels of war. The humans were not here to flee or to bargain, they were here to conquer. The defenders fell to their knees, overwhelmed by the sight. Tears streaked their faces as they watched more soldiers pour from the ships, their boots striking the ground in unison. The sound carried across the battlefield like thunder rolling over mountains. The enemy felt it too. Their courage finally cracked. Entire squads began to retreat, their war machines stumbling back in fear. They had faced countless enemies across countless worlds, but never had they seen soldiers like these. Soldiers who did not fear them, soldiers who did not bend, soldiers who brought with them the certainty of change. The humans pressed forward, unstoppable. Every blast, every strike, every step announced the same truth. The war was no longer the enemy's to win. The defenders raised their voices in a single cry, shouting words of hope that echoed through the ruins. For the first time, their voices did not sound broken. For the first time, they believed. And in the heart of the burning city, with the enemy stumbling back and hope rising from ashes, one truth spread faster than fire: humanity had arrived, and nothing would ever be the same again. The night carried a different sound now. Not the cries of the defeated, not the cruel laughter of the enemy, but the rhythm of battle turning against them. Smoke curled above the ruins as fire spread, yet beneath the chaos one truth became clear: that humans were unstoppable. The enemy had always been certain of their power. For years, they had crushed every army, destroyed every resistance, burned every world. They believed themselves untouchable, feared across the galaxy. But tonight that fear was theirs. Every time a human weapon fired, another machine collapsed. Every time their boots struck the ground, enemy soldiers faltered. The whispers began quietly, carried through the ranks of the enemy like a disease. They do not fall, they do not fear, they are not like the others. At first, commanders shouted over the voices, trying to restore order, but whispers are stronger than orders. Whispers crawl into the mind and take root, and once they settle, fear follows. The humans advanced without pause. Their formation bent and shifted, like water, flowing around obstacles, striking from angles no one expected. Their silence made them more terrifying than any roar. They fought as if the battle was already theirs, as if every strike only confirmed what they already knew, that they would win. A young enemy soldier fired wildly into the smoke, his hands shaking. He had faced countless battles, survived sieges that lasted weeks, but now his body betrayed him. His weapon slipped from his grasp as his heart pounded with panic. He looked into the glowing visors of the human soldiers, and in that moment he knew they were not fighting an army, they were fighting inevitability. The defenders saw it too. For so long they had cowered in the ruins, broken and silent, but now they saw the enemy stumble. They saw them hesitate, retreat, tremble, and something awakened inside them. They began to rise, voices shaky but growing stronger. Their weapons, though old and battered, fired again. Their courage returned. The battlefield shifted. It was no longer a slaughter of the weak, it was a storm of resistance. The humans struck like lightning, and the defenders followed like thunder. The enemy was caught between them, crushed by power from one side and fury from the other. An old defender, his face marked with scars of battles long lost, raised his voice above the fire. "They are not just soldiers," he shouted. "They are a message." His words carried, echoing through the ruins. Others picked them up, shouting with him, their cries mixing with the roar of battle. The enemy commanders tried to rally, but their voices cracked with desperation. Their soldiers no longer listened. Their machines stumbled, their formations crumbled. They looked to the sky for reinforcements, but all they saw were more human ships breaking through the clouds, their descent like meteors promising destruction. And still the whispers grew. "They don't stop, they don't die. They are human." The word spread like fire, reaching even those who had never seen a human before. The sound of it shook the enemy to their core. They had heard of humans, small stories at the edge of the galaxy, tales dismissed as myths. A species too young, too wild to matter. But those myths now walked the battlefield, wrapped in armor, carrying weapons that shredded through armies. One by one, enemy soldiers began to fall back, not because they were ordered, but because their courage had broken. Their weapons slipped from their claws, their steps turned into retreats. The commanders screamed at them to stand and fight. But fear was stronger than loyalty. The humans pressed forward, their pace steady, their silence unbroken. They did not need to chase the enemy. Their presence alone pushed them back. The defenders watched in awe, realizing that fear itself had become a weapon, and the humans wielded it better than anyone ever had. A young defender, barely more than a child, stared at the battlefield with wide eyes. They are like fire, he whispered. Everything they touch changes. Nothing can stay the same. His words were true. The defenders could feel it in their bones. This was not just a battle for one world. This was the beginning of something greater. The enemy's fear would not stop here. It would spread. Every soldier who fled would carry the story with them. Every commander who survived would speak the name of humanity with trembling lips. The galaxy would hear of this night. The galaxy would learn that when hope was gone, when defeat was certain, when the end had already been accepted, humans had arrived. The enemy broke completely. Entire squads abandoned their posts. Machines turned and lumbered away, and what was once an unstoppable army dissolved into chaos. The defenders cheered through their tears, their voices raw but full of life. The humans did not stop to celebrate. They kept moving, sweeping the battlefield, finishing what had been started. They fought not like saviors, but like a storm, leaving nothing untouched. Above, the last of the human ships descended, pouring more soldiers into the fight. The rhythm of their boots echoed across the ruins, joining the fire, the smoke, and the cries of a broken enemy. The defenders watched, stunned. They had lived in despair for so long that hope felt strange, almost painful. But it was there, rising, in their hearts, undeniable. They were no longer alone. The enemy had once whispered that no one would come, that no one dared stand against them. But tonight, that lie was broken. Tonight, the galaxy had seen the truth. Humanity had come, and everything fit. Hope, war, and the very future of the stars was already beginning to change. The battlefield was no longer a place of despair. Smoke and fire still covered the city, but the air itself felt different. For years, every sound had belonged to the enemy, their machines, their weapons, their cruel laughter. Now those same sounds were broken, buried beneath the thunder of human boots and the roar of human weapons. The defenders, who once cowered in silence, now stood taller. Their voices rose in shouts, their hands steady on weapons that had long gathered dust. Side by side with the humans, they surged forward. Fear that had lived in them for so long was burning away, replaced by something fierce, something alive. The enemy could not understand it. They had crushed this world. They had broken its armies, shattered its defenses, silenced its people. Yet now, when victory should have been certain, everything was falling apart. Their soldiers stumbled, their machines faltered, and everywhere they turned, there were humans. The humans did not slow, did not tire. Their movements were sharp, every step calculated. When one squad met heavy fire, another flanked the enemy, cutting through their lines. When machines pushed forward, humans climbed their frames like predators, planting charges that tore steel apart in bursts of flame. Their silence was more terrifying than any war cry, because silence did not need to prove itself. It only promised inevitability. The defenders followed, clumsy at first, but soon finding their rhythm. Their weapons cracked through the smoke. Their voices shouted commands, and for the first time in years, they were not running, they were chasing. The hopeless resistance had been reborn. An enemy commander, desperate to regain control, ordered all forces to hold the central square. War machines lined the streets, their cannons glowing, their claws digging into the ground. Soldiers filled the ruins, rifles aimed, ready to unleash everything they had left. The square would be their wall. If they broke here, they knew it was over. The humans advanced without hesitation. Their leader raised his weapon high, its glow pulsing with energy. He gave a single signal, and the soldiers spread wide, moving like a wave across the battlefield. The defenders followed, their cries echoing off the ruins. The final clash began. The first volley shook the earth. Blinding light lit the streets as cannons fired, scorching the ground. Buildings collapsed under the assault. But through the fire came the humans, their armor glowing, their weapons answering with a storm of blue energy. The air itself seemed to scream as the two forces collided. Machines exploded one after another, their frames torn open, their parts scattering across the ruins. Human squads moved with deadly precision, striking weak points, overwhelming the enemy's strongest weapons. Defenders poured in behind them, filling the gaps, driving the enemy back step by step. The square became a furnace of chaos. Fire spread across the ground, smoke filled the air, screams and shouts drowned each other out. Yet through it all, the humans remained calm. They moved as though this was not chaos, but order, as though the battle was unfolding exactly as they expected. An old defender raised his weapon, his voice breaking as he shouted, "With them, with the humans." Others joined, their cries building until the sound rose above the fire. It was a roar of defiance, a sound the enemy had not heard in years. Panic spread. Enemy soldiers fired wildly, their shots striking stone and steel but rarely hitting their targets. Machines stumbled backward, their formations crumbling. The commanders shouted until their voices cracked, but no one listened. The fear was too strong now. The human leader stepped into the square, his weapon glowing like a burning sun. He lifted it to the sky, then brought it down in one devastating strike. The beam of light ripped through the enemy's line, cutting machines in half, blasting soldiers off their feet. The defenders gasped, then cheered, their voices carrying across the ruins like thunder. The enemy broke. Some fled into the alleys, others dropped their weapons and ran. The proud army that had once crushed entire worlds now scattered like frightened animals. The defenders surged forward, their courage unstoppable now. Every shot they fired carried years of pain, years of silence, years of anger, and with every enemy that fell, their voices grew louder, their hope brighter. The humans did not celebrate. They pressed forward, ensuring every corner of the square was cleared, every threat destroyed. Their precision was terrifying, their silence unbroken. To them, this was not victory. This was duty, and yet for the defenders, it was everything. Tears streamed down their faces as they fought beside the humans. They felt alive again. They felt strong again. They felt free again. When the last machine fell, crashing into the ruins with a sound like thunder, silence spread across the battlefield. But this silence was not the silence of despair. It was the silence after a storm, the breath before the realization that everything had changed. The defenders looked to the humans, their voices trembling as they spoke the word again and again. Human, human. It was no longer a whisper of confusion, it was a cry of awe. The enemy had thought themselves unstoppable. They had believed no one would dare to challenge them. Tonight, that belief had died. The humans had not only fought, they had turned the hopeless into the brave. They had turned despair into defiance. And the galaxy would hear of this night. The galaxy would know that humans had entered the war, and nothing, not fear, not fire, not death itself, could stop what was coming. The smoke thinned as dawn touched the horizon. The city was still broken, its towers shattered, its streets filled with fire and ruin, yet something new lived in the air. The sounds of battle faded into silence. But it was not the silence of defeat, it was the silence after victory. The enemy was gone. Their once proud army had broken apart like sand in the wind. Machines that had crushed cities now lay in pieces across the battlefield. Soldiers who had shouted promises of conquest were either dead or running, their weapons abandoned in the dirt. The terror that had ruled for years had fled with them. Defenders stood among the ruins, staring at what remained of the enemy. Their hands shook, not from fear, but from the shock of survival. For so long they had lived in despair, certain that nothing could stop the invaders. Now, as they breathed the smoke-filled air, they realized the truth. The nightmare was over. But their eyes did not linger on the wreckage. They turned to the humans. The armored figures stood in silence, weapons lowered but not forgotten. Their visors glowed faintly in the fading firelight. They did not cheer. They did not raise their voices. They simply stood, calm and steady, as though this battle had been nothing more than another step in a long journey. The defenders whispered the word again, their voices trembling with awe. Human. The sound spread, growing louder with every voice that joined. Soon it filled the streets, echoing off the broken walls. It was not a whisper anymore. It was a song, a chant, a declaration. The humans did not answer. They only looked across the battlefield, their silence speaking louder than any word. It told the defenders what they already knew, that this was not the end. This was only the beginning. High above, the sky still burned with streaks of light. More human ships hovered in the distance, their dark shapes cutting through the clouds. The defenders had thought this was rescue, but now they understood. Rescue was not enough. The humans had not come to save a single world. They had come to change the war itself. The enemy, scattered and broken, carried their fear with them as they fled. Their commanders would return to their fleets, their leaders to their strongholds, and they would whisper of this night. They would speak of armored soldiers who did not fear death, They would speak of weapons that tore through their strongest machines. They would speak of silence that was heavier than thunder. And they would speak of and name the name of the species that had turned their victory into ruin. The galaxy would listen. Some would laugh in disbelief. Others would tremble in dread. But all would hear, and when the story spread, they would not be forgotten. A young defender, his armor broken and his face streaked with soot, stepped closer to the humans. His voice shook as he spoke, though he knew they might not understand. You came when no one else would. You came when all hope was gone. You changed everything. The human leader turned his head slightly, the glow of his visor reflecting the fires of the battlefield. He gave no reply, but in his silence there was something deeper than words and understanding. The defenders felt it in their hearts. Humanity had not come because of alliances, or treaties, or duty. They had come because that was what they did. When others surrendered, when others bowed, humans rose. When others saw the end, humans saw the beginning. The defenders raised their voices, shouting into the dawn, their cries carried across the ruins, reaching every survivor, every corner of the broken city. It was a cry of freedom, a cry of defiance, a cry of life. The humans stood in silence and listened, and then, without ceremony, they turned and began to march again. Their boots struck the ground in rhythm, steady and unbroken, echoing into the morning. They did not linger, did not rest. Their war was not finished. The defenders watched them go, their hearts burning with something new: faith. Faith that the enemy could be beaten, faith that this galaxy was not lost, faith that humans would carry the fight wherever it needed to go. The last fires of the night burned low, and the sun rose higher, casting light over the ruins. The world was scarred, but it was alive. The war was not over, but hope had returned, and it had returned wearing human armor, carrying human weapons, marching with human boots. The galaxy would never forget this night. The galaxy would never forget that. When the end seemed certain, when the last light of hope had died, a new fire rose in the darkness, that it was human, and nothing would ever be the same again.